Explain to me what is climate smart agriculture?
Well, we figured that we really have two major goals of our time. One is food security for a growing population, and the other is to deal with climate change. And to deal with those two goals simultaneously, we think that we need to do climate smart agriculture. And that is based on three pillars. One is that we really need to make sure that the income and the productivity on farms go up. Otherwise, we cannot secure the food for a growing population. And then secondly, due to climate change, we also need to adapt the food systems and make sure that there is resilience both among livelihoods and with ecosystems. So that's the adaptation part, which connects to the climate change process. And then thirdly, the third pillar is climate change mitigation. We all know that the land use sector contributes a very high proportion of the emissions that we are worried about. So at the same time as we need to produce more food in a more efficient way, we also need to reduce our emissions over the long term.
Well, what stage are we at the moment? We've obviously been growing crops, growing food to feed ourselves for thousands and thousands of years in a sustainable sort of way in many, many cases. So what are we looking at now? I mean, surely there's plenty that we've learnt. We have the knowledge. We can go to all different parts of the world where indigenous people, where farmers in very harsh conditions are growing enough to sustain themselves in an environmentally friendly way. What are we looking at now? What do we need to do now?
Well, you're quite right. Agriculture has adapted to climate change for 8,000 years. So it's not new to the discipline. But what's happening now is that two things are happening. One is that climate change is accelerating the pressure on the systems. And we really need to very quickly find new varieties, new production systems, and build more resilient agriculture. And at the same time, population continues to increase and we need to produce more food, and that's a very difficult equation. So simply put, it's the pace that has changed.
But scientifically, do we have the means to grow enough to feed the world? I mean, I think specifically of South America, where they're growing a huge amount of soya. A lot of that soya is exported to China to feed their cattle, not to feed the people of South America. So we seem to have the technology, yet is it not being applied as it should be applied?
We believe that we can continue to have what we call sustainable intensification of agriculture. That is, we can find ways to produce more food in a more efficient way. And we actually have to believe we can do it, otherwise we would be in a terrible situation. Whether we should have a lot of opinions about how we use the produce from the land is a different story. But we can at least say that we have the knowledge, we have the capacity to increase production in a sustainable way, but there are other things missing. There is a political will that needs to come forward, there is finance that needs to come forward, and part of that finance obviously needs to come from the climate change perspective.
Right. So is that your role here, to try to shift the political will, to try to convince people that these measures that do exist should be implemented?
Obviously, we don't take part in the negotiations. We can only point to possible solutions. But yes, and one aspect that we are very firm on is that we should not expect climate finance alone to solve all these problems. We need to find ways to combine the efforts that can come from climate change commitments with commitments that can come from ensuring food security and investments in agriculture.
Right. Is that happening, this combination of methods? I mean, does that already happen? Are people sharing in information, knowledge, technology?
I think we have a fair traction on the concept of climate smart agriculture, and really that's what it is about. As I said before, we have three pillars: increase income and productivity, improve resilience, and make sure we don't emit more than we need to of greenhouse gases.
Right. And you're producing a report at this conference, you say, on energy, yes? Is that correct?
We are releasing a study on energy and agriculture tomorrow, the 29th of November, which is a first attempt to assess how much energy is actually used by the food and agriculture systems, and also how much is produced by these systems. Because as much as 11% of the total energy supply comes from the biological systems, mainly in the form of wood fuel for heating and for cooking. But then also as much as 30% of the net consumption of energy is consumed by the food and agriculture systems. That's a lot. So there are certainly good reasons for looking at efficiency gains in these sectors.